welcome back everybody. Today I'm going to be going over synthesis and compromise, which are of the two hemispheres also. So they're a hemispheric difference. It's a pattern that's nascent in the universe, and they each have distinct properties. So here we go. So I'm going to be going over it, which seems to be a recurring pattern in our universe at each tier of analysis. Each of them has their own purpose and meaning. So synthesis has its own purpose and meaning. Compromise has its own purpose and meaning. Anytime you have a synthesis, it necessitates a compromise. Anytime that you have a compromise, you either get a synthesis or some kind of reaction. So either entropy or exothermic. So, or what would be the other one? Endothermic and reciprocity. So the fact that synthesis happens is the reason why we have a left hemisphere. So we have a left hemisphere to articulate and create synthesis. So we can see synthesis with our left hemisphere. We can see the creature, the form, the being, and we can also create those things with our left hemisphere. So the left hemisphere really is, they're both abstract. You can both your hemispheres can be abstract, but your left hemisphere can recreate a reality. It's almost like where your imagination lives. Where your right hemisphere see things as they actually are, your left hemisphere can make things up. So that you can say the imaginations of both hemispheres, and particularly of the right, as it sees the connection and relationship of those made up things to reality. But we cannot make up anything that does not exist in reality, at least in part. So like a dragon, well, there's lizards. So we just combined a lizard with something that flies and just made its wings scaly. Bats have similar wings. So there's if you look at each piece, you can't create anything or imagine of anything that doesn't exist in reality, which is why that's how we can know that God and Lucifer exist. It's because there's a pattern in reality that exists in this way, and we just abstracted this pattern out to be Lucifer and God. And that's what we do. And the angels, you could say, as our brain has become more and more refined, as we've evolved, the modules have been intertwined to a higher and higher degree to where it no longer needs all these parts, which is why God's used to be there was pantheons. There never really existed a whole God for the longest time. Because people saw different components or aspects of their being, their emotions, their desires, these are just nascent intuitions and the first articulations of the universe to ourselves. So we are part of the universe, so we're articulating ourselves in doing so. So there's the pattern, and then there's the underlying pattern, meaning, and then there's the synthesis or the form. And right now we're going to go over the synthesis and how they compromise as they're created or manifest in reality. So first I'm going to go over the purpose. So what is the purpose, the utility? How can we utilize this understanding of synthesis and compromise in our lives and to aim us in the right direction towards homeostasis? So dichotomology provides a robust framework for navigating and integrating true dichotomies, offering an immense utility in various domains of life. By understanding synthesis, we comprehend why rationalizations are essential for interpreting the world and manipulating it to create our own syntheses. So syntheses are important, but we have to remember that they're of the rationalist left hemisphere. That is of the Luciferian intellect. That is the pattern that we need to make sure that we have a hold of in terms of our right hemisphere perspective. So we need to make sure that they're in sync, that we have enough information and understanding. So our right hemisphere intuitions are going to tell us hey, you don't know enough about this. Like we did with the pandemic. We did not know enough about COVID, and we didn't we didn't know enough about the disease itself. So we didn't know enough about the disease or the vaccines in order to properly make decisions on those. So we made a decision based on terrible information. And then on the other hand, we made another split-second decision based on things that we do not fully comprehend yet. We've messed with genetics and the germline, and now we've edited a gene in a particular way that's affected our genes and everything all the way down of every level of analysis. We have not understood it properly. So the genes that are in something that we've created could affect all the other genes in our genome in ways that we do not understand. And we need to be careful about that, because AI is going to help us fully understand what powers there are involved in this. And in me, I have the Moderna vaccine. This is a rationalized creation of human beings that we do not know what the result is going to be about. So this approach allows us to recognize the manifestations of tears in the universe, essential for effective manipulation. A man-made synthesis is not inherently negative. However, it necessitates comprehensive analysis to ensure it serves our relationships with other beings, aiming for equilibrium and homeostasis. So if it's in the pursuit of equilibrium and homeostasis, then you cannot be wrong. Like, there's no way for you to be wrong if you're trying to find a balance between two extremes. And obviously, that means you also can't be right. So it's impossible to be right, it's impossible to be wrong, but in the pursuit of what you believe to be the case. So if I understand that too much control and too much freedom are bad, well, then I know when I see the examples of when freedom or control are good and when they're bad, then it allows me to properly gauge how to judge whether or not we've gone too far down one way or the other. And we do that through both hemispheres. So we judge it through our intuitions. Like, I just feel like this is wrong. And I see the patterns, and I see the outcomes, and I see all the things at play, versus I see it with empirical evidence and rationalizations. So you can see it two ways, but you need both. If you're not incorporating both perspectives, both understandings of reality, then you're going to miss the mark. You're going to head towards an extreme in some way. So they help us navigate true dichotomies. So knowledge acquisition for effective decision making. Before achieving synthesis or compromise, it's crucial to gather as much information or acquire as much as information as possible in knowledge. This ensures that a decision aligns with the true equilibrium between extremes rather than towards an extreme. A synthesis requires compromise to reach equilibrium, which each tier in the synthesis demands new compromises and syntheses. For example, a child as a synthesis of two beings necessitates new compromises between the parents. Properly aligning relationships grounded in truth and love lead to stability and growth. This principle extends to the atomic level, where synthesis of quarks into atoms results in unique characteristics and necessitates compromise between all the elements of atoms. So at every level of analysis, you can do this. You can understand, okay, well, what is the synthesis that's happening? Quarks into atoms, atoms into molecules, molecules into single cellular life into multicellular life into multicellular social life. And at each one of those, you can just think about what are the compromises that need to be made? What are the new true dichotomies that are at play that need to be compromised on? So, for example, like the tardigrades, they really don't care that much about temperature. They don't need to find a compromise to ensure that they have a consistent internal temperature. But as you go up the tiers, the more unstable it is. So it's like getting harder and harder as we go up to perfectly balance everything, because there's so many more that come into play. There's so many more true dichotomies that manifest as a result. It's like, what does a tardigrade really need to take into account? It's basically nothing. It can survive in any environment. Like, it doesn't need much, but heat doesn't affect it as much. Space, it can live in space itself for extended periods of time. So it's just an example. Like, as you go up the tiers, the harder it is for us to maintain balance, because we're getting closer and closer to being one with heaven, and in the material world, it would be impossible to achieve heaven, but we will, in getting closer and closer to it, it's easier for us to actualize and be with God. If that makes sense in that aspect. Okay. Okay, distinguishing between tiers for better interpretation. So understanding the distinction between different tiers is vital for interpreting the world. Each synthesis at a particular level interacts primarily within its tier, but also can influence lower levels. This wasn't supposed to be higher. It can influence higher, one above, or it can influence above and below, but it sends a chain reaction to it. So the immediate interaction that it has is with a tier above or a tier below. So atoms can affect molecules, and they interact with them, which can interact with the life form, which can interact with the social dynamic of nature. Because let's say you get a disease, it's a bacteria, it spreads, it manifests, and in your body, it starts to take over and hurt you. To the degree that it affects you is the degree which it affects your social life. So the more it affects you, the more it affects your social life. But then you keep going down the tiers of analysis. Well, it's affecting everything in that system. Everything that's in your being is being affected from tier 7, which is us, all the way down to tier 5, which is single cellular organisms. Well, what's below that? Okay, well, I don't think there's anything that necessary, like it started at that tier. So it started at the tier 5 and it affected all the way up to tier 7. So things at lower tiers can affect higher tiers, and then things at higher tiers can affect lower tiers. So everything it's an interchange between tiers, and that's how you should think about just the syntheses. So building utility and meaning. The integration of useful and meaningful syntheses is crucial for aligning with the universe. While something useful may not always be meaningful, meaningful entities inherently possess utility. This interconnectedness highlights the necessity of rationalizing for relationships and the balance between material and abstract worlds. So, abstracting the meaning, let's say there is a meaning to, or like, okay, so if you wanted to achieve a particular goal, let's say it was to get somebody as sick as possible without killing them, which is a weird example, but it's what come to mind. So you're going to fix the system to where they're going to get as sick as possible. You're going to see how much they can handle, which is a weird, cruel experiment. But then in doing so, not only do you understand the full true dichotomy of sickness and health, but you see the meaning and relationship that it has to us and its utility. So like understanding how sick someone can give us a lot of utility. It allows us to understand what is the very breadth of what's possible for our current physical existence. And we could probably simulate that, honestly. I don't know. But that's kind of how utility and meaning balance. It's like, well, something doesn't, just because we understand that something can make us sick, if that thing is on the other side of the galaxy, it's not going to affect us. So it really has no relationship to us. So the utility of it is to get us sick. But the meaning it has to us is really irrelevant because it doesn't affect us. It has no relationship with us because it's way over there. So understanding true dichotomies. True dichotomies such as those found in bodily homeostasis illustrate the importance of balance. For instance, the body maintains equilibrium through various true dichotomies like temperature, fluid regulation, and glucose levels. These examples underscore the necessity of considering multiple true dichotomies to achieve harmony and homeostasis. So again, your body doesn't just take one of these into account. It tries to take all of them into account, and then it does so in an interplay, in a dance, between all these things, because if it releases too much of one, then it has to release some of another. And that's why people are getting so sick and they're getting so much inflammation these days, is because there's some kind of imbalance in their body that we need to take into account. But the thing is it's hard to detect, because unless your body's not functioning properly, which means the damage has already been done, how are you to measure whether or not your body's taking enough into account to create homeostasis? Because what can happen is, let's say you're ingesting a bunch of sugars and your body's maintaining your homeostasis, but it's putting so much wear and tear on your pancreas. Boom, you get cancer over time, because your body can't maintain the level of, not only can it not maintain the level of work that you're putting on it and stress, but that stress is inducing the changes. So the cancer that we're getting more and more often in society is a result of our body's reaction to the extremes we're exposing it to. So in exposing it to constant bombardment with sugar, it is activating genes that are telling it to change, because it needs to take these new things into account that we've created, these new materials that we manifested and put in our bodies. It needs to take it all into account, and it's trying to. But it's like, well, there's something I need to change about myself, because I'm not able to maintain this in perpetuity. There's something wrong here. And your body will tell you when there's something wrong. You'll intuit it. And people aren't listening to their intuitions. They're like, I feel like crap today. Well, I could just chalk it up to a bad day. Well, no, it's probably because there's something misaligned somewhere at some level of analysis. So if you don't feel like you're full or complete, there's some kind of imbalance. And it's the reason why periods drive women to be off balance, because it's trying to give them a new equilibrium. It's the same reason why people who have PTSD do not feel like themselves. They are completely dissociated with a whole aspect of themselves, of meaning and relationships and all these other right hemispheric perspectives that it shoves them away from. So, but this is part of what we're going to go into, which is the meaning of synthesis and compromise. So the interconnected tiers and fundamental dichotomies. Dichotomology elucidates the universe through interconnected tiers, each representing a synthesis of underlying layers and integrating further complexities. This tiered structure reflects both physical and metaphysical realities, emphasizing that perpetual interplay between different levels of existence and consciousness. At the base lies the fundamental dichotomy of Lucifer and God, symbolizing exothermic entropy and endothermic synthesis. This dynamic tension propels the universe's evolution, demonstrating the necessity of both order and chaos in achieving balance. So this is kind of like one of those things where you have to have both things being true at the same time. So God is everything. So that means he's also of, order and chaos, and like part of building everything, but also Lucifer is of building everything. So it's like both of them can work together, and Lucifer in service of God is what created all the syntheses. So anytime Lucifer keeps trying to break things down, and God is trying to build them up into larger wholes. But in order for us to do the same thing, we have to break things down in order to create wholes. But also, Lucifer is the one that manipulates everything. So they both have their own role to play here. So Lucifer breaks things down and manipulates things. But God makes the connection of things. So God connects the things together, and then Lucifer builds them. So each is playing a role in building, and each is playing a role in destroying. So it's one of those yin and yang relationships where both are doing both, but one is more nascent in what that is. And like the pattern of God is all the things of the right hemisphere, and the pattern of Lucifer is everything of the left hemisphere. But both are playing a role. Both are playing a role in what the other is doing. But as long as we're aiming towards God, then we're going to keep achieving syntheses. We're going to achieving togetherness, and we're going to take enough things into account, more things into account, to achieve it. So, but Lucifer is going to try to trick us and get us to worship him and make us think that he's the one that's building everything, when in reality he's just putting together the connection that God made. So God made the connection, but Lucifer is the one that builds it. And a good example of this is just between the male and female nature, like masculinity and femininity. Like this is the same pattern. Like Lucifer is of the male nature, of masculine nature, and God is of the female nature, the feminine nature, where God birthed everything in reality, but Lucifer is what started creating ordered, structured, simplistic stuff. But at the same time, those things became more complicated. So it's like in Lucifer creating simple things in the service of God, it made more chaos and more complexity. So it's a dynamic inner relationship between the two. So the role of synthesis and compromises. Syntheses at each tier exhibit unique characteristics and complexities. We've kind of went over that. It's like, okay, every single tier of analysis has an innate patterns to it, but it also has its own unique characteristics that are not like anything that happened before. By acknowledging compromises and influences across different levels, we gain profound understanding of the interconnectedness of the universe, fostering deep sense of harmony and purpose and meaning. So take from that what you will. Balancing change and stability. The dichotomy of change versus stability reflects the dynamic interplay between progress and preservation. So you don't want too much progress, or it's gone beyond our knowledge and our understanding of what we're dealing with. But you don't want to go too slow, because if you go too slow, you stifle that progress that could bring about something good or beneficial to humanity and move us closer to the next tier of synthesis. So, and you get out of balance with the homeostasis of reality. So there are things that we're doing that are damaging, and there's things that we're doing that are good, like polluting the planet in the air, polluting the water, polluting, like these things are, all of our syntheses are getting too much for our world to handle, and we need to clean up our mess. And the same is true of our society. We're progressing too fast. We do not fully understand the things at play, especially when with things like gender ideology, which I can go over in another video. But the concepts that they're tinkering with are not yet fully articulated. And I can articulate some of them, but not all of them. But yeah, like the idea of sex being on a spectrum, like that is not the case, but your personality's on a spectrum and your morality's on a spectrum. But if that's what you're using as your framework to identify with a sex, then you're going to be wrong. What you should be identifying with is masculinity or femininity. And that would be in the, part of the male and female dichotomy. And obviously it's a rationalized dichotomy because we are one being, like male and female is of the being of a human. So we're both human, woman, man. Okay. Both of man. Okay. Balancing change and stability. The dichotomy of change versus stability reflects the dynamic interplay between progress and preservation. So, and you can see this all the time. Like the left hemisphere wants to either push everything forward really fast or push everything back really fast. And people that are advocating for us to go back really far are probably like it's in service of Lucifer. But people who are advocating for us to go too far forward too fast are probably also of Lucifer, because our left hemisphere thinks in the future and the past, which is why they keep bringing up the past. So individuals like liberals, they're going to say all this happened in the past. This is what we need to take into account to properly orient ourselves. And then they'll also do the same for the future. And there's some truth to that, because let's say someone does a crime to you. Well, it happened in the past, but it's something that should be judged in our society, in a system that is just and of God, if that makes sense. So this is getting really abstract and complicated, but basically you want to balance change and stability. You do not want to have too much of one. And we will know as a society when we're ready, because everyone will feel comfortable. Well, not everyone, but there will be a vast majority of people that feel comfortable with moving forward with whatever it is that we're doing. So, for example, there was very little pushback when it came to the implementation of cell phones. But as we understand it more and more, we understand that this new synthesis brought about with it the Luciferian aspects, the hedonism, the gratification of social media, like short clips that just, give you a dopamine hit. Like all these things are of the Luciferian nature, and we need to now take them into account, which we're doing slowly as a society as we understand them. Like, wow, this is really leading to bad outcomes, and the intentions are bad. Like, what do people go in there watching these shorts for? Like, it's all just to get gratification, the utility of it. It's like hedonism. Like, what is going to give me the most pleasure in the shortest amount of time? And that's what they do. But they're not understanding the imbalance that's making in their mind. So, and that's how I would say, like, the female versus male nature manifests in a synthesis. It's of the nature of God, or Lucifer and God. And that's where I think that these concepts came from. And it's an extreme, it's a rationalized extreme of what's at play, but it is the thing that is at play. Okay, so political dichotomies and hemispheres, they also apply to, I was just saying, liberals versus conservatives, and how it applies to our society at large. But in the end, we're trying to pursue homeostasis. And that, again, that doesn't mean it's right in the middle all the time. Often with human endeavors, it is, because, like, you could say, okay, so for the true dichotomy of like control versus freedom. If you look at what's possible in reality in terms of how much control you can have over someone versus how much freedom, it's possible that both can be expanded. Like the true dichotomy can be expanded, but what are the limits of that? And we have to abstract that, because it's not possible. The things that we would abstract as having that ability would not be possible in reality. And to find the balance between the two, like society could be closer to freedom, like especially in the US, it's closer. The equilibrium for us could be closer to this side because of what nature has selected for. And maybe like that's why it's really easy to go really, really far over to the land of control, because the full true dichotomy isn't necessarily where our equilibrium is. So we can go way further off into control than we can go into freedom, because what would the ultimate freedom look like? It would be just individuals doing whatever they want at any point in time. And that'll never work. Most people intuitively understand that we need some kind of system or structure abstractly in both that's concrete and written to manifest what we want in society. But okay, so I've introduced the concepts, the way you should perceive synthesis and compromise. So synthesis is the coming together of two separate things into one thing. And it creates its own characteristics, its own true dichotomies that are going to manifest, and it increases the complexity of reality. And then compromise is everything that happens as a result of that synthesis, and the compromises you need to make to properly orient yourself in a true dichotomy. So between order and freedom, we need some kind of compromise between them. You can't have absolute freedom and you can't have absolute control. So what is the compromise? Where are you going to meet in the middle? That's an ever-moving target, and it's constantly going back and forth. And that's what people call wrestling with God. It's like, well, we are in your true dichotomies. We exist in your true dichotomies, and we're just going to balance and tug and wrestle with where exactly you want us to be in terms of each one of these things. Okay. And then my next video, I'm going to go over tier 0, and then I'm going to go through every tier. And tier 0 might be a shorter video because it more or less just goes over God and Lucifer, and it is the first true dichotomy, but it also contains an infinite number of dichotomies. So it's weird that something that's outside of existence can manifest every true dichotomy that we can have in existence. But that's where our abstract mind goes, because the first tangible thing is what we think of, but I would say tier 0 exists outside of reality because it's in our abstract. It's not quite, there's nothing concrete about it. It's all in our mind, but also of the patterns in reality. So I know people are going to get upset about me using either God or Lucifer too loosely, but also people are going to get upset that I'm using it too like specific. So the right balance is somewhere in between those two. You don't want to use it as something that is a being in terms of like, I'm going to sit here and talk to God like as if he's in front of me, like a material thing. But it's more like an abstract notion of the connectedness of reality at every level of analysis all the way down. And it could actually be, there's no evidence yet for it, but at what level of analysis can our brain go down to? Because it seems like it can go all the way down. And there's no reason to believe that quarks and leptons can't interact with every level of analysis. So consciousness goes all the way down to like below the quarks and leptons. So that's where consciousness comes from. Whereas like that's what we're experiencing. Like the world is experiencing this, and we are the world, and the world is we're part of the world, and the world is part of us. And now it's our ego talking. So that's our left hemisphere simplifying us into a thing, whereas our right hemisphere expands us and understands like, okay, well, I am part of this I'm on the spectrum of a true dichotomy, of the intersection of these true dichotomies. And there's nothing like me that can ever exist and will ever exist. But I've manifested consciousness from this entity. I don't know what it is or what to call it. Any word that we use, any concept we use will not be perfectly accurate, which is what a true dichotomy is. You cannot be accurate anywhere on it. So God is all the true dichotomies. Okay. So thank you guys. I love you. I hope you found it interesting. And we'll go over these tiers All right. Thank you. Love you guys. Bye.